State-of-the-art drones, equipped with artificial intelligence, fly today over the same dust that once covered the chariots of pharaohs and Assyrian generals. Why, after 3 millennia, does the most lethal technology on the planet still revolve around the same ravines mentioned in biblical texts? You feel that the world is immersed in random chaos, but for those who know the map, every military movement is predictable and inevitable. What many interpret merely as prophecy, an elite general treats as an absolute logistical necessity. In this video, you will understand why missiles worth $100 million become useless if the enemy controls a specific checkpoint described in Genesis. We will reveal the tactical connection between drying rivers and modern hydraulic siege engineering. And in the end, you will see global conflicts like an analyst who reads the terrain before the headlines. Armageddon is not a mystical concept. It is a relentless geographical reality. Watching the current news generates vertigo. Threats multiply, and the next major conflict seems capable of emerging from any direction, without warning. But this is the illusion of the surface. When we remove flags, speeches, and propaganda, what remains is the relentless silence of the earth. Geography is the only political force that does not negotiate. It is the fixed board where modern technology, no matter how sophisticated, collides with millennia-old bottlenecks. To understand tomorrow, we must descend to ground level, where geology dictates sovereignty, and where every narrow passage holds the key to control. The Jezreel Valley, seen from above, looks like a harmless agricultural carpet, but for a military strategist, it is a relentless funnel. At the center of this funnel lies Megiddo. The importance of this location lies not in temples or palaces, but in its position as the key that locks or opens the Via Maris, the commercial and military route that linked Egypt to Mesopotamia. In Revelation, chapter 16, verse 16, the text states that the forces of the world would gather at the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. But why here? Because Megiddo is one of the points where the terrain allows the deployment of large combat formations coming from the coast toward the interior. Pharaoh Thutmose III, in 1457 before Christ, already stated that capturing Megiddo equated to capturing 1,000 cities. This detail changes everything when we look at modern logistics. Contemporary war tanks, even with 60 tons, remain subject to the same geology that limited the geology of antiquity. If you control the elevations around this valley, you nullify the invader advantage. The prophecy merely described what the topography had already decided. Whoever wishes to dominate the Levant must pass through this limestone bottleneck. And here begins the point that most people ignore. It is not the quantity of weapons that defines victory, but the shape of the terrain that receives those weapons. A single elevated point transforms an advance into total exposure. It is in this type of detail that real war happens. While Megiddo functions as a gate, the Euphrates River has always served as the definitive moat of civilization. If the gate is locked, the invader tries to bypass the moat. In Revelation, chapter 16, verse 12, we read that the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great Euphrates River, and its waters were dried up so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. To the casual reader, this sounds like a catastrophic miracle. For an intelligence analyst, it is the announcement of a structural failure. When the water flow is interrupted, the riverbed ceases to be a barrier and becomes dry, clayey soil, incapable of holding back heavy movement. This ceased to be theory in 1990, when Turkey used the Ataturk Dam to interrupt the river flow for 1 month. The result was practical proof that a national border can disappear in weeks. Control of the sluice gates in the Taurus allows a state to decide when the path should be opened. The drying of the Euphrates is not merely a phenomenon of scarcity. It is an engineering maneuver that removes the last physical obstacle between the Eastern powers and the heart of the Levant. And it is there that the prophetic reading gains tactical weight. The biblical text does not speak only of a symbolic event. It describes a condition of passage. When the water disappears, what was once protection becomes a corridor.
Ascending from the dry bed of the Euphrates toward the basalt escarpments of the Golan Heights is to feel the abrupt change in pressure and temperature.
Here, the terrain ceases to be a horizontal line and becomes a natural wall. The metallic crack of tracks over volcanic rock echoes where, millennia ago, King Og of Bashan positioned his defenses. In Deuteronomy chapter 3 verses 1 through 4, the narrative describes the capture of 60 fortified cities in this elevated region. The Bible is not merely recounting a war chronicle, it is showing that control of the height determines who survives. In the Golan, geography nullifies technology in several scenarios. Communication systems can suffer interference, drones can lose reference, and armored vehicles become vulnerable to observation from higher ground. The advantage here is not measured in megabytes, but in meters of altitude. Geology is the only firewall that cannot be hacked. Whoever controls these heights possesses a pause button over any offensive that attempts to cross the Levant. Notice the pattern. Whenever the height changes, the war changes with it. Technology remains important, but it ceases to be sovereign. On elevated terrain, even the best machine depends on who sees first. The descent from the Golan Heights toward the south leads us to the final destination of any claim to hegemony in the Middle East, the Jerusalem Basin. If Megiddo is the gate and the Euphrates is the moat, the Valley of Jehoshaphat is the chamber of slaughter. Geologically known as the Kidron Valley, this deep ravine that separates the Temple Mount from the Mount of Olives is not merely a burial site. It is a tactical error for any army that attempts to besiege the city without dominating the elevated flanks. In Joel chapter 3 verse 2, the prophecy is surgical. I will gather all nations and bring them down to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and there I will enter into judgment with them. In military practice, this translates to confinement in a space where maneuver is technically impossible. The historical proof appeared in the siege of the year 70, when the Roman legions of Titus discovered that the topography of Jerusalem transformed the attack into brutal attrition. Even with satellite-guided missiles, modern infantry still faces the same dilemma in 1948 and 1967. The steep incline of the Kidron slopes nullifies tank cover and forces combat on terrain that favors whoever is on top. This is one of the centers of logic. Jerusalem does not win by volume, it wins by design. The terrain forces the enemy to fight at a disadvantage before the first shot is even fired. Technological sovereignty is a fragile promise when confronted with the mineral density of the Levant. We believe that the global positioning system and satellite mapping have removed the fog of war, but tactical reality proves otherwise. In deep limestone ravines, the signal suffers interference and loses stability. In enclosed valleys, drones can suffer navigation degradation, and the operator must return to reading the relief with their own eyes. Electronic warfare can silence communications, but it cannot hack geology. While a cyber attack brings down power grids, it is powerless against a basalt hill or a narrow mountain pass. In moments of critical crisis, generals are forced to abandon screens and return to direct observation. The heat of the soil, the silence of the radios, and the suspended dust are concrete reminders that technology is a temporary tool on a permanent board. Where the global positioning system falls silent, topography screams. And this contrast is decisive. The modern world sells the idea of total control, but it only takes a narrow valley to remind us that no screen replaces the ground. The Jordan Valley is not merely a political border. It is an absolute geophysical barrier that acts as the definitive moat of the Levant. This fissure, one of the deepest on the Earth's surface, creates a drop-off that functions as a natural wall against incursions from the east. In Joshua chapter 3, verses 15 through 17, the narrative describes the crossing of the river during the flood season as the event that unlocked the conquest of the land. This indicated, millennia ago, that the Jordan in its natural state is a heavy tactical obstacle. For a modern armored commander, this valley is a heat and logistics trap. The steep descent down the escarpments and the subsequent climb up the hills of Judea expose units to descending fire and extreme wear. Here, the geometry of confidence is reversed. Whoever is at the bottom of the valley finds themselves in a zone of permanent vulnerability. The heat distorts sights, the terrain punishes engines, and every movement becomes a consumption of energy and time. Contemporary military history has consolidated this moat as the physical limit of sovereignty. Where the river flows, geography dictates that the advance ends. The valley is no longer just a biblical setting, but a gear that prevents expansion. The convergence of all these checkpoints, the Gate of Megiddo, the moat of the Euphrates, the heights of Bashan, and the funnel of Jehoshaphat, points to a single center of gravity that history insists on not ignoring: Jerusalem. For the secular analyst, the city is a logistical nightmare. For the biblical strategist, it is the anchor of the board. Psalm 125 verse 2 describes how the mountains surround Jerusalem. This is not merely a metaphor, it is an accurate reading of the topography of Judea. Jerusalem is situated in a natural basin protected by mountain ridges that force any invader to fight against gravity, attrition, and time. During the siege of 1948, the only way to keep the city alive was through an improvised road, cutting through the mountains under constant fire. This proved that survival here depends on every meter of elevation. The geology of Jerusalem acts as a force multiplier. It transforms a small garrison into an obstacle and reduces technological confidence to a secondary detail in the face of rock. Here is the center of the argument. The city seems small on the map, but it forces any power to pay dearly for every advance. It is the type of place where the terrain speaks louder than the flag. The final convergence is not in an open field, but in a silent and sealed stone structure, the Golden Gate, on the eastern wall of Jerusalem. If Megiddo is the entrance and the Jordan is the moat, this gate is the absolute closing point of prophetic geography. In Ezekiel chapter 44 verse 2, we read, "This gate shall remain shut. The Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it." To the lay observer, it is merely an obstructed stone arch. To the strategic planner, it is the symbol of a barrier that has defied military logic for centuries. In 1541, the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent ordered the physical sealing of this gate. His motivation was to consolidate a defensive advantage. By closing the gate and establishing a cemetery in front of it, he created a denial zone. Cemeteries are poor terrain for mechanized infantry. The soil is uneven, the advance loses fluidity, and the psychological impact of combat among tombs weighs heavily on any invading force. This blockade transformed the eastern face of the city into an impassable cliff. Today, generals know that any attempt to advance on this flank would be logistical suicide. And the most important detail is this: when access is sealed by the very shape of the place, the conflict ceases to be a matter of bravery and becomes a matter of impossibility. The modern obsession with digital precision has created a catastrophic blind spot: the fragility of absolute dependence. We believe that artificial intelligence and total connectivity have nullified the tyranny of distance and terrain, but every centimeter of soil in the Levant proves otherwise. The true geometry of confidence resides not in code, but in the resilience of what is analog. When networks fall and satellites go silent, the strategist who understands the language of the Earth is the only one who remains in command. In a world of integrated and vulnerable systems, your safe harbor must be built on foundations that do not depend on a password or a radio signal. The geography of the apocalypse is not a map of destruction, but a manual of autonomy that privileges the essential over the sophisticated. If you position your life in the bottlenecks of independence, where you control your own resources, your own water, and your own vision, you become far more resistant to modern sieges, whether they are economic or physical. What the ancients called providence, the modern analyst defines as strategic redundancy. In the end, the board remains the same. Technology is fleeting, but positioning on the rock is enduring. Understanding this map is not merely an exercise in historical erudition. It is a vaccine against informational manipulation. While most get lost in the froth of daily events, you now possess a reading code for global movement. The terrain never lies. Military history is, ultimately, the chronicle of men attempting to negotiate with geology, only to discover that the board was already set from the beginning. From today onward, when opening a map of the Levant, or hearing about a new troop deployment, you will see not merely ephemeral political borders, but the deep scars of a theater of operations awaiting its final move. This is the end of confusion and the beginning of a sharper perception of chaos. The Earth remains as the only witness that cannot be bribed or silenced. In the coming months, when headlines scream with the friction of these same checkpoints, you will realize that you are no longer reading news. You are observing topography in motion. The geography of the apocalypse is the final auditor of a world that tried to ignore its own foundations. The fog of war is only dense for those who refuse to look at the dust beneath their own feet. If this analysis has revealed layers that the common news ignores, the most important thing now is to continue studying the map before accepting any ready-made narrative.